Thank you, Father Fuchs, for keeping Justice Jackson alive. Thank you, Elizabeth Lenna, who I think of every day because I have the honor to have her name as part of my title as I send my emails, which many of you get. I'd like to tell you tonight briefly about two dinners. The first occurred in May of 1940. It occurred at the Hotel Jamestown building down the lake in the heart of downtown Jamestown. The crowd, I'm sorry to report, dwarfed you. There were 1,200 people present that evening. The organizing began early that winter, and it took months of planning between Jamestown and Washington and so forth to have this dinner, which was to honor Robert Jackson. The planning began that January and February of 1940 and was very detailed and carefully orchestrated between the Jamestown planners and the White House and others in Washington, because a momentous event was about to happen. Robert H. Jackson soon would be President of the United States. He was only the Attorney General at that point, but Franklin Roosevelt, the president who had appointed him, was retiring. American presidents did that after 2 terms. FDR had begun to build a library a couple of years earlier. He was going home to Hyde Park, and he had made it known quite widely, quite explicitly, publicly and privately, that, as pundits at the time put it, his Jack was on Jackson. Jackson was 47, turning 48 that February. He had never run for an office in his life, unless you count Democratic County Chairman of Chautauqua County, and basically that wasn't a highly contested race. Yet he had risen through private practice, through the bar, through the New Deal, through appointments to various offices to be the future of the New Deal. And there was an organized, planned, extremely energetic effort from the president on down. Now, by the time the Jamestown dinner occurred that May, somewhat understood in Jamestown, deeply understood in Washington, the story had changed. And to give him credit for his insight, the person who always was an opponent of the story and the scenario was Robert Jackson. Because as all of this activity was going on in winter of spring 1940, Jackson for president, he was the one New Dealer who was out giving speeches just like this at a podium very explicitly saying, we need Roosevelt. This 2-term stuff is a tradition that needs to be broken for this man at this time. Now, Robert Jackson thus spared Jamestown enormous traffic problems. He didn't become President of the United States. He simply became the Attorney General who presided over the Department of Justice as it wrestled with some of the most complex liberty, security, war preparatory legal issues in our nation's history. John Ashcroft's job, 2001, 2, and so forth, was a pale shadow of what Robert Jackson's Attorney Generalship was. And then Jackson just became a Supreme Court justice. And after 4 years of penning the distinctively eloquent, powerful, enduring works of precedent and individual opinions, all he then did was get drafted by a president of the United States to prosecute what was expected to be Adolf Hitler in April of 1945, the surviving principal Nazi war criminals, and all he did was Nuremberg. And all that did was, in the memory of forks in the road, steer this country away from brutality and atrocity, firing squads, summary execution, brutality, towards the rule of law, towards the carrying of a burden of proof, towards public proceedings, towards international justice, and towards the development of an evidentiary record that is our knowledge of the Holocaust. And then all Jackson did was return to the Supreme Court, and for the 8 remaining years of his life, continued to build the legacy of distinctive, eloquent, accessible, candid, and not particularly ideological judging. The second dinner is this dinner. What we're here doing tonight is, of course, looking back on 10 years. And I want to pause and just say as directly and as explicitly as one can, in one flat declarative sentence, thank you, Greg Peterson. I met Justice Jackson's son, Bill, in 1999. It turned out to be the last year of his life. I was the young, dumb law professor in the right place at the right time. And this man, who had been his father's executive assistant at Nuremberg, began to tell me in great detail what had been pent up, and I was there to hear about that experience. And then Bill Jackson had mentioned his cousin Harold Adams, so I called this lovely man who became a dear friend, who I also remember regularly, and he said, there's this lawyer in Jamestown, Greg Peterson, you should talk to him. So that's how I got here, and it's been a special 10 years. But how you got here and this dinner is, in a sense, a much bigger deal than the 1940 dinner that was just going to be about somebody who was going to be a president of the United States. You know, okay. That's important. That's great. That's enduring. That would have been, sort of remembered and appreciated. The life that Jackson lived and the marks that Jackson left became of a different kind, and I dare say a deeper, more permanent, enduring kind, because they are of the substance of an individual life greatly lived. Complex, imperfect, flawed, you name it. This was a real man. But what he did from his humble beginnings, from his self-directed education and his development, to all the things he attained, was left a model of greatness that is what we are here, meaning in the Jackson Center, meaning at this dinner, meaning on that website, meaning on this board and in this organization, and meaning across the coming decades, doing. Because Robert Jackson, I will say, makes your life better. Learning this, reading it, thinking about it, is a chance to reach for it in the way that he reached for it. And that's part of the greatness of this country, this trajectory, a life like this, and a model like this. There's a speech, many of you are on my Jackson email list, along with 15,000 plus other people, and they forward it, so my IT guys who complain about this say it reaches well over 100,000 people. Many of you read recently the speech that Jackson gave at the Dunkirk High School in June of 1930 at the commencement. He was only 38 years old, and it is, in the Depression, kind of a hippie speech, I must say, by a guy who was a prosperous young lawyer. Because what he told those 18-year-old kids was, don't be your parents. Make your life substantive. Do something with the time that's yours that is of substantive value. And he split life, the 24-hour day, into 3 8-hour periods. The 8 you sleep, you need. And the 8 you work, you need to do, that's your livelihood. And the remaining 8 are your life. How you earn your living is 8 hours, and how you spend your leisure is your life. And frankly, how Jackson spent his living and his leisure gave him 16 hours. But what we're doing here is learning from and propagating, to some extent emulating, to some extent building on that model of the substantive choice to be better, to aim higher, to reach deeper, to accomplish more, to waste less, to leave greater. And so what I wish for all of you is what we are doing here across 10 years and in this dinner. We're trying to be Jacksonian. And in a backward-looking sense, that's what the life stands for. And in a forward-looking sense, physically in Jamestown, in ether form through the web, and literally in locations all around the world, that's what Jacksonian people, and there are millions of them, are doing. They're here with us tonight. They're at this dinner. They're at the 10-year dinner that will follow this in 2020, and so forth. I don't know where the Jackson Center will be in 100 years. I'll wish it well, and I'll be gone. But it will be, because it's got a project that's of that enduring importance. It's about what makes your life. And so I thank each of you for your part in it. I'm extremely grateful for your support and your interest. I'm standing on the shoulders of Greg and everybody else who has gotten us to this point. And we all stand on the shoulders of Robert H. Jackson.